5 minutes ago, Queen Camilla brought a touch of royal elegance to the 2025 Cliveden Literary Festival today as she officially opened the event, celebrating one of her long-standing passions of literature. Hosting a special reception at the historic Cliveden House, the Queen welcomed a distinguished crowd of authors, festival supporters, charity partners, and students from the London Academy of Excellence. Founded in 2017, the Cliveden Literary Festival has become one of Britain's most esteemed cultural gatherings, continuing the estate's legacy as a hub for great thinkers such as Alexander Pope, Alfred Lord Tennyson, George Bernard Shaw, Jonathan Swift, and Sir Winston Churchill. Now in its 8th year, the festival saw Queen Camilla deliver a heartfelt speech before meeting its founders Simon Sebag Montefiore, Natalie Livingstone, Lord Roberts of Belgravia, and Catherine Osler. The Queen also joined a lively discussion on the importance of reading and the enduring value of literature with an esteemed panel that included Sir Salman Rushdie, Sir Jonathan Bate, and Dame Marina Warner, reaffirming her deep commitment to promoting literacy and the arts. She had continued her literary mission today as she visited the Clock Tower stage, where historian and author Simon Sebag Montefiore invited her to officially open the 2025 Cliveden Literary Festival. In her speech, the Queen spoke about the power of reading and the importance of nurturing a love for literature she has long championed. As she stepped from the car, there was the practiced ease of someone for whom public life was routine, but also the unmistakable warmth of a woman who loved literature fiercely and personally. Her greeting to those waiting, festival founders, authors, charity partners, and students, was kind and attentive. She spoke with people the way she read, carefully, respectfully, and with a curiosity that made them want to keep talking. Cliveden's history was woven into the festival's identity. Visitors were reminded, in small plaques, program notes, and the occasional well-placed anecdote, that the grounds and house had hosted great thinkers and writers through the centuries. Alexander Pope, whose satirical wit had once found echo in these gardens. Alfred Lord Tennyson, for whom landscape and inwardness were in constant dialogue. George Bernard Shaw and Jonathan Swift, whose pens had sparred with and shaped public life. And later, Winston Churchill, who had found in Cliveden a refuge that fed both strategy and prose. The festival, the Queen observed in conversation, felt like a continuation of that tradition, a place where ideas were held up to the light and examined, where reading was not merely pastime but civic oxygen. The Clock Tower stage, a beloved spot on the festival map, had been the site of many memorable conversations. Today it glowed with banners and a small audience gathered in chairs and on the low grass. Historian and author Simon Sebag Montefiore, one of the festival's founders and a man who carried the same blend of erudition and amiability as the place itself, welcomed Her Majesty with a congratulatory bow that was more ceremony than deference. The crowd broke into warm applause. Simon's invitation for Camilla to open the festival felt less like protocol and more like the passing of a torch to a kindred spirit. Her Majesty took the stage with a speech that was, in tone, intimate and steady. She spoke of the power of reading, how a single book could cross time and take a reader into another mind, and of the responsibility of those who love books to make them accessible. Her words were measured but heartfelt, seasoned with small, personal notes, a memory of a teacher who first read to her from poetry book, a recollection of the quiet solace a novel had given her during a turbulent season. She did not grandstand. She simply spoke about the simple, stubborn human truths that had always made literature necessary. The need to imagine, to empathize, to be less alone. Those in the crowd listened attentively. Established authors who know their lines as well as their signatures. Students from the London Academy of Excellence, some of them clutching dog-eared copies of their favorite novels. Volunteers whose lives were woven into the festival's logistics, and representatives from Book Aid International, a charity whose mission to ship books and learning materials to places in need aligned seamlessly with the festival's ethos. The Queen's mention of Book Aid, how books not only educate but open doors to new possibilities, drew a particular round of approval. The charity's presence at the festival underscored a practical truth. that literature's power was greatest when it reached beyond converted audiences into places where resources were scarce and hunger for knowledge burning bright. After the speech, the Queen met with the festival's founders, Simon, Natalie Livingstone, Lord Roberts of Belgravia, and Catherine Osler. Their conversation was easy, the sort of measured, genial exchange that comes from long collaboration on a project you believe in. Natalie, who had steered programming with a particular eye for contemporary voices, shared plans for upcoming sessions that would explore the intersections of technology and narrative. Lord Roberts, whose patronage had been instrumental in expanding the festival's reach, spoke about outreach initiatives aimed at drawing in more young readers and writers. Catherine, whose organizational acumen had shaped the festival's gentle but firm structure, lodged a playful complaint about the difficulty of matching the right chair to every panelist, a small testament to the meticulousness that makes such public events feel effortless. The panel on the importance of reading was a highlight, with Sir Salman Rushdie, Sir Jonathan Bate, and Dame Marina Warner seated alongside the Queen. The conversation was both luminous and lively. Sir Salman, a man whose life and work had been shaped by the power and peril of words, spoke with characteristic candor about free speech and narrative responsibility. His remarks, tempered by the memory of past struggles, emphasized that books were not neutral vessels. They could challenge, wound, and heal. Sir Jonathan Bate brought the perspective of a scholar, arguing that close reading remained a vital practice in an era of distraction, a way to cultivate attention and nuance. Dame Marina Warner, whose scholarship bridged myth and modernity, talked about the ways stories, whether ancient or newly minted, give people frameworks to understand their lives. The Queen listened with evident engagement, occasionally contributing a brief reflection or question. The exchange was not a display of royal authority, but a shared inquiry. What does it mean to fall in love with a book, and how do we pass that love on to the next generation? It was a question that bridged every speech and session that day. Students from the London Academy of Excellence, invited to sit in on the panel, prepared questions that cut through abstraction to the concrete, about access to books, the representation of diverse voices, and how literature could be made more relevant to young lives straining under the pressures of exams and social media. One of those students, a quietly expressive girl named Aisha, asked about the role of schools in fostering a love of reading. Her voice held the self-assurance of someone used to being listened to. She wanted tangible ideas, not platitudes. Dame Marina suggested embedding storytelling across curricula so that literature wasn't a standalone subject, but a lens on history, science, and ethics. Sir Jonathan advised that the best way to teach reading was through example. Teachers who read aloud, who model curiosity and the habits of thought that literature rewards. Sir Salman's answer was more blunt but memorable. Give young people control over their reading choices. Compulsion kills curiosity, he said. Curiosity is the seed. The session spilled into a smaller, more intimate conversation afterwards. The Queen spent time with several of the students, asking about their favorite books and the authors who had shaped them. The students' eyes lit when she mentioned the Queen's reading room, an initiative she had long championed that sought to create quiet, welcoming spaces and to encourage reading across generations. For many of the young visitors, the notion that a public figure would so clearly value books was galvanizing. They posed for photos, swapped book recommendations, and one bright boy gave the Queen a hand-drawn bookmark. Such gestures, small manual artifacts in a digital age, seemed to please her more than a formal presentation might have. The festival was not all reverie. There were practical edges to the day's program. Workshops for aspiring writers on voice and revision, a children's tent where storytellers coaxed wide-eyed laughter, a literary market where independent presses sold slim volumes and hand-bound notebooks. Between sessions, the grounds hummed with conversation. Old friendships rekindled beneath the lime trees. Strangers discovered common enthusiasms over tea and lemon cake. Younger festival-goers argued good-naturedly about the best contemporary novelist. The artistic director, watching from a distance, kept a careful eye on the schedule while allowing the festival's informal magic to work. In the French dining room of Cliveden House, where later the Queen hosted a reception for speakers, supporters, and charity partners, the atmosphere was both ceremonial and homey. The room retained the quiet grandeur one expected in a stately home. High ceilings, gilt mirrors, and the soft gleam of silver. But the long tables were arranged with an intimacy that invited conversation. The Queen moved through the room with the practiced grace of someone for whom formal receptions were familiar terrain. Yet there was a distinct brightness in her interactions as she paused to speak privately with representatives from Book Aid International. They discussed, in practical terms, how festival funds could support the shipment of classroom sets of books to schools overseas and how partnerships might expand. The conversation was rooted in the belief that a book in the hands of a child in a remote village could be as transformative as any high-profile policy. Later, a quieter scene unfolded on the terrace as the afternoon waned. The Queen and a small party, including Simon Sebag Montefiore and Catherine Osler, wandered through the walled garden where the air carried the mingled scents of roses and fresh earth. Simon pointed out features of the landscape that had inspired his own historical imagination. Catherine remarked on the ways the estate's caretakers preserved not only the gardens but stories embedded in the place. It was a moment in which history and personal narrative braided. Such mingling was the reason places like Cliveden remained alive. The Queen, walking slowly, reflected on how an estate could be a living archive of private pleasures, of public dramas, and of the everyday practices that keep culture breathing: conversation, reading, the exchange of ideas. As dusk fell, the festival's lights blinked on like punctuation marks across the lawns. The clock tower glowed, and the last panel members gave final autographs beneath the shelter of a late-blooming magnolia. The Queen's day ended not with fanfare, but with a sense of quietly accomplished work. She had opened a festival, yes, but she had also sat, listened, and engaged. She had affirmed, in public and in specifics, the commitment she had long made to literacy and the arts. The festival itself moved on into the evening with readings and a gala that celebrated both contemporary voices and the silent labor of those who sustain cultural life. For many who had gathered, writers, volunteers, students, and guests, the day had left an impression of possibility. That literature could still serve as a force for connection, for critical thought, and for compassion. The Queen's presence had been a reminder that the love of books can be a public project, not a private eccentricity. Her endorsement was not mere ceremonial embellishment. It was an act that lent visibility and urgency to the festival's ambitions. In the weeks that followed, the images of the day, the Queen on the clock tower stage, animated conversations in the French dining room, the students returning to their classes with new resolve, traveled through newspapers and social media. Book Aid International reported an uptick in donations, citing the festival's platform and the tangible commitments made at the reception. The London Academy of Excellence noted a renewed interest among its students in literary clubs and public speaking. The festival's founders, invigorated, began plotting next year's program with fresh ideas for outreach and partnerships. Yet for those who had been there, the most lasting impression was quieter. It was found in the memory of a teacher's smile as she watched her pupils speak confidently after meeting authors, in the hum of renewed conversation between an author and a young reader, in the sight of a veteran volunteer, hands flower-dusted from baking for the tea tent, who felt seen and valued. The Cliveden Literary Festival had, in 8 short years, become more than an event. It was a community, a network of care and ambition whose public face that day had been the Queen. Her involvement had a subtle but unmistakable effect. It folded the festival into a lineage of places and people who take literature seriously, not as decoration, but as a tool that shapes minds and builds bridges. When the estate quieted and the last of the guests departed, the house settled back into its long rhythm. The echoes of speeches and laughter softened into a companionable hush. That night, by the glow of lamplight in a small room, a volunteer wrote in a notebook, "Today we opened a festival, but what we opened more truly was opportunity for readers to be readers and for readers to be listeners." It was the sort of sentence that might be filed away, read years later and recognized as an honest snapshot of a day when tradition and possibility met at Cliveden's gate. Thanks for watching.